It's so true.
Hello, class, and welcome to our second lecture on group stages. To follow our lecture on forming, in this lecture, we're looking at the next two group stages, storming and norming, as part of our group skills in substance abuse counseling course.
Yeah.
As we look at the objectives for the week, I want to remind you to review the chapters for the week prior to viewing the lecture, as it is intended to supplement your reading. By the end of the week, you should be able to identify behavior that may be considered resistance during the storming stage, describe how peer relationships develop in the norming stage, and distinguish among the first stages of groups, including forming, storming, and norming. First, let's review the 5 stages of group development that we're looking at during these 3 weeks. The stages include the initial stage of forming, which we discussed last week, and is characterized by initial caution associated with any new experience. During the forming stage, members may attempt to avoid being rejected by others, and may be superficial, centering conversations on historical or future events that don't necessarily have a direct impact on the group experience. With respect to tasks during the forming stage, remember that the group must deal with apprehension, as well as review member goals and contracts, specify rules, set limits, and promote positive interchange among members. This week, we're going to talk about the next 2 stages, storming and norming. And then next week, we'll wrap up by talking about the working and closing stages, also known as performing and adjoining. So first today, we will look at the storming stage and talk a little bit about member behavior here. As the group transitions from the initial forming stage to the next stage, which is storming, group members may begin to compete with one another to find their place in the group. Peer relationships may be uncomfortable as the group struggles over power and control, and may be characterized by anxiety, resistance, defensiveness, conflict, and confrontation. The storming stage helps bridge the group closer to a time of productivity, and although it may be uncomfortable, it is necessary in the development of a successful group. Primary tension is what members are likely to experience during the first session, and primary tension is concerned with the kind of awkwardness that comes with strange situations. Secondary tension, in contrast, deals with intra-group conflict and is what we see in the storming stage. With the help of group leaders, members work through non-productive ways of relating and begin to establish new patterns and a role in the group. The issue of power is central to the storming stage and refers to the capacity to bring about certain intended consequences in the behavior of others. In response to the struggle for power, group members may at first attempt to address the issue through old approaches, like fighting or withdrawing. And because members are still just beginning to get to know one another, there's very little trust established in the group during the storming stage. Members may exhibit resistance to change through behaviors like intellectualizing, questioning, or advice giving, as well as band-aiding, where members prevent others from expressing their emotional pain by trying to soothe a calm member who may actually benefit from exploring themselves more deeply. Other resistant behavior may be seen through dependency, or members who monopolize group time, and also through an attack on the group leader, which may come as a result of subgrouping, fear of intimacy, or extra-group socializing. There are many strategies for working through the interpersonal and intrapersonal group issues that occur during the storming stage, which may include inviting a process observer to come provide feedback on what he or she sees occurring within the group. This neutral third party can help spark conversations, which might allow members to attempt to change behaviors or modify ways of interacting. Working through the storming stage will result in members having a greater capacity for productive work by having established emotional space for one another. The interdependency among group members and the stability of the group as a whole cannot deepen until issues within the group surface, are acknowledged, and are dealt with. The work that occurs during the storming stage allows for the group to progress to the norming stage, and ultimately this is the work that allows for productivity and success in the long term. As we move into the norming stage, Group norming refers to the we-ness that describes group identity or cohesiveness that's now possible once the group has resolved the storming stage. During this stage, peer relationships are categorized by an increased sense of identification, where members begin to see themselves as being similar to one another. Members are also more likely to work harmoniously with each other, displaying high levels of cooperation and collaboration during the stage. Cohesion describes a sense of groupness that promotes high morale, trust, and solidarity. Cohesive groups are more effective in their communication patterns and also tend to have more fun, but there can also be pitfalls. For instance, a group that's highly cohesive may avoid addressing anything that could potentially be upsetting in an attempt to maintain that positive atmosphere. But ultimately, this detracts from the overall success of the group and its members. With respect to tasks, during the norming stage, group members learn to regulate, evaluate, and coordinate their efforts. They do so by showing support, empathizing, facilitating discussion, and providing self-disclosures which reveal information about themselves to other group members. The norming stage results in a group that feels connected and is able to move on to concentrate on being productive rather than protecting themselves. Norming allows group members to clear their minds, reassess their goals, feel good about themselves, and make new plans for the working stage of the group. So here we are again, ready for our second video clip looking at leading in the here and now. This 1 hour section is called Transition and Flight. And you will again need to log in using your username and password in order to access the video. This video is going to illustrate these next two stages for us of storming and norming, and also provides a nice model for strong group leadership. Please make sure to take the time to review this video, whether it be in short segments or the full hour in one sitting, and look specifically for issues related to struggles for power, issues of anxiety, and later an increased sense of identification and cooperation and collaboration among group members. This final slide compares each of the three stages that we've discussed through these lectures. I encourage you to review the information carefully and make sure that you can distinguish among the three stages thus far. Remember that forming is characterized by initial caution associated with any new experience and an attempt to avoid being rejected by others. During this stage, group members try to be superficial and center conversation around historical or events that do not have a direct impact on the group. During this stage, members must deal with apprehension, review member goals and contracts, specify rules, set limits, and promote a positive interchange among members. We've seen that the storming stage is characterized by a time of conflict and anxiety. During this stage, the group moves from the primary tension that comes with the awkwardness around any new experience to now secondary tension, which has to relationships within the group. During the storming stage, there's an attempt to balance between too much and too little tension, as we talked about with cohesion. And group members tend to be more anxious in their interactions, and power is a main concern here. During the norming stage, there is a strong sense of we-ness that comes when individuals feel a sense of belonging. High levels of enthusiasm and cooperation are also during the stage. Group members begin to identify with one another, and the relationships may benefit from hope, cooperation, collaboration, and cohesion. During the norming stage, group members agree on norms, accept prescriptive and proscriptive norms, and there's a heavy emphasis on commitment. This serves to conclude our lecture on storming and norming through this review of all three stages thus far.
All right, so you see the forming, storming, norming, and performing. A lot of you guys are kind of doing those first stages of the group. And it takes a few weeks to get to norming. So that's characterized by feeling of we-ness that comes when an individual feels a sense of belonging. So there's that one. And there was another one I wanted to show you guys. So let me see if I can get to that, which I think is right here. Let me see here. I've got it for you guys here.
And welcome to our first lecture on group stages. In this lecture, we will be looking at the first stage of group development, forming, as part of our group skills in substance abuse counseling course. As we look over the objectives for the week, I want to remind you to review the chapters for the week prior to viewing the lecture, as it is intended to supplement your reading. By the end of the week, you should be able to identify the factors necessary for forming a group and describe the tasks of a beginning group. As your book points out, there are many ways to categorize and describe the stages that functional groups go through. And despite the differences in labels, most agree that groups go through between 4 and 5 stages in the life of a group. Back in the 1970s, 2 researchers named Tuckman and Jensen identified 5 stages of group development: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjoining. This still stands as a very common way for discussing group development. You may refer to the table in your book on page 84 if you want to see a comparison of a few different ways that authors have conceptualized the stages and transitions of group development. Forming a group is a process that takes several steps, and although some of the steps may be completed at the same time, none may be skipped if the group is going to form properly and thrive. First, every group relies on a clear and thoughtful rationale for existence. Groups that attempt to form without a strong rationale are likely to be unproductive and potentially harmful for their members. Leaders must also decide on the theoretical framework from which to work, and the theoretical format should be appropriate for the purposes of the group. The successful formation of a group also relies on practical planning, like the meeting time and place, and leaders should consider potential obstacles in planning this group. Considering how will members get to the meeting, if the group's intended for a certain population, say school-aged children or elderly people, transportation may be a specific issue to address. Publicized group is another consideration that is addressed during the forming stage, and it's important to keep in mind that how a group is announced influences both the ways that it will be received by potential members and also the kind of people who will join. Take some time to consider whether word of mouth, personal contact, and/or written announcements will best suit your intended audience, and that will contribute to the intentionality of your group formation. Screening and pre-training are processes that involve meeting potential members either individually or in a group format to determine who should join a group and who should not, by identifying needs, expectations, and commitment, challenging myths and conceptions, and conveying information to those potential members. This is an opportunity not only for group leaders to select members, but also for potential members to make sure that the group is something they're truly interested in. Once members have been selected, pre-training serve as almost an orientation session to help members get acclimated. The selecting of group members and group leaders can be seen as an outcome of the screening and pre-training, with leaders selecting group members and group members selecting to be part of the group with those leaders. Once we have a group, there are a number of tasks that must be accomplished during the first session, including dealing with apprehension, reviewing goals and contracts, specifying rules, setting limits, promoting positive interchange among members, and resolving potential group problems. A certain level of anxiety is considered a natural part of beginning groups, and group leaders can address anxiety directly in the group or work to clarify any issues that seem to arise as a result of member anxiety. Reviewing goals and contracts within the group is an opportunity to restate the purpose of the group during the first session and allow members to share more about their own personal goals. Although some groups may begin with an established set of group rules, the first session is a great time to review these rules and also allow members to make contributions to the rules. Stating rules in positive terms rather than negative terms will help set the tone of the group. For instance, rather than having a rule against violence, The group could state that members will respect the physical and psychological safety of others at all times. Limits help members understand boundaries in the group, and limits can be addressed during the initial session, but must also be addressed when members test them in the group setting, either by breaking rules or norms. Group leaders can promote positive interactions among group members by being enthusiastic, by drawing out members, holding focus on interesting topics, or shifting the focus when topics are irrelevant or interesting to only a few members, by cutting off any hostile or negative interactions as well. There are a number of problems that can occur during the formation of a group and afterward, some of which involve people and some of which involve process. Subgroups are one such example of a problem that can come up in group process where cliques of members band together and may become troublesome. Leaders must remain tuned in to interaction patterns and promote interchange among members, potentially by providing more direction for interaction through exercises or through activities. Your textbook authors also address this with group member behavior, and the caution that I want to echo as you consider difficult member roles during the first session is that the tendency to label members based on their behavior can be incredibly distracting and disrupt the success of a group. Rather than labeling members based on potentially difficult behavior, it can be helpful instead to see that behavior as a symptom of an issue that's developed in the group and approach it with an open mind. For instance, silent members may be feeling hostile or attempting to withdraw from the group, but they may also be shy, reflective, or simply slow to assert themselves. Instead of seeing a silent member as difficult, it can be helpful to ask a simple open-ended question like, what do you think about what the other members have been saying? Pages 102 to 104 provide strategies for the beginning stage of a group, and I would encourage you to review these pages carefully as they're quite helpful.
All right, so
over the course of the next 3 weeks, I'll ask you to view clips to illustrate the issues we're discussing. To access the videos, you may need to sign in using your UC ID and password. You should then be connected directly to the videos. If you have any trouble accessing the video once you successfully logged in, try using the link again or searching for the video title. This one is titled Leading in the Here and Now, the Initial Stage. In our first viewing, we'll see a new group coming together and forming. In the coming weeks, I'll ask you to view 2 more videos as we watch this same group grow and develop. This first video lasts about an hour, so I encourage you to either carve out time to view this in one sitting or split the video into smaller segments and watch it over the course of a couple viewings. As you watch this week, try to look for the tasks that exist in the beginning group. As members and leaders deal with apprehension, review goals and rules, begin to set limits, promote positive interchange among members, and resolve potential group problems. Looking at the link, you may notice that this video is not captured recently. However, the group leader you're about to watch is a highly respected member of the group or profession and has developed some excellent teaching tools, including these videos. Enjoy. In summary, forming is characterized by initial caution associated with any new experience, attempting to avoid being rejected by others. During this first stage of group development, group members try to be superficial, center conversation around historical or future events that do not have a direct impact on the group. Tasks during this beginning stage include dealing with apprehension, reviewing member goals and contracts, specifying rules, setting limits, and promoting positive interchange. This serves to conclude our lecture on forming, and I will see you next week.
all right, so when we made those for the University of Cincinnati, we had a few things go down, and since then, Dr. Kaplan group counseling came up. If I'm even spelling him right, and it was under videos, and it's not Jay Kaplan, it's Daniel Kaplan.
And we're back with March Sadness. The team is looking down the barrel of a 4:55 meeting.
Their gap.
Okay, so we're going to get started with our first lecture on group therapy. So
Let me share my screen. And what I like to say about the introductory lesson is that we are going to use this as a framework for further discussion later in the semester, but this particular lesson should be treated as an introduction to group therapy. It should be treated as building blocks for that which is to follow. So let's begin. So in this lesson, we're going to get a brief history of group therapy. We're going to talk about what is group therapy, why do we conduct group therapy, who's involved in the group therapy process, and how is group therapy conducted. So the who, what, when, where, why, and how, that kind of joke. We're going to go through soup to nuts. So let's start with the history of group. Well, if we go before the 1900s, there was a lot of people who needed help but didn't have services. So people would be put in all kinds of asylums, such as Philippe Pinel emancipated one of the asylums in France, and there was another one in England, the Bethlehem Hospital. But people would be gathered up if they had mental illness or they appeared bizarre relative to society, and they were, it's a form of mass incarceration, they were put in asylums. And this was the poor, these were people who were immigrants who might not have spoken the language, if people violated the cultural norms. And a lot of therapy, group therapy, happened in these asylums in that way. Now, if we fast forward a little bit later, 1905, we started to have group therapy for tuberculosis. We take it for granted that tuberculosis is not a deadly issue, but at one time there were TB hospitals all throughout the country to isolate and treat individuals with tuberculosis. So there was group therapy built around that. And then Jacob Moreno started to use puppet theater or theater of spontaneity, what we call psychodramas, to help people talk about their experience as the protagonist, as the antagonist, as an observer. So there were groups like that. Fast forward to the 1930s, Alcoholics Anonymous is founded, and these are a whole host of self-help groups that were created. And then in the 40s, we had collective counseling through Alfred Adler. We're going to talk about Adler and individual psychology next.
So you see the groups Alcoholics Anonymous were included into some of these, and that's a big deal. Because before, the early 1900s, there was not much of anything, and that's what happens. So that is what's going on.
Next lecture, but he had a group therapy model, and there were several others. And then World War II and the effects of World War II led to popularization of group therapy in the mid to late 40s and 50s. As you can see, that group therapy has a long history. Now, the technical skill set before the 1900s and some of the approaches in Alcoholics Anonymous are inconsistent with psychology today, but nevertheless, there were attempts to do group therapy early on. Now, the human potential movement, this is a big thing during the war. You might have heard the hippie movement, but the hippies were individuals who protested war, were into peace, were into introspection, self-reflection. and the human potential movement that came out of this movement is responsible for a lot of the humanistic approaches to group therapy. Now, there are other forms of groups. We have Gestalt groups and T groups, which are related to interpersonal change, and encounter groups are designed for normal individuals, where they remove barriers to functioning, and then marathon groups are intensified group experiences. You might have heard of a Tavistock group, which is an extended, very open experience where they allow the things from the unconscious to creep out. So you could have a marathon group that goes 8 hours or a whole weekend or whatnot. So when we think about groups, we have group therapy, we have individual therapy. Some people feel that group therapy is second rate, but it's not. And the argument why people say that group therapy is second rate is because individual therapy, I get 45 minutes with a focus on me, whereas in group therapy, I have to share the time. Granted, group therapy processes tend to be longer in duration. The ideal time frame is about an hour and a half for a standard group, but they can be shorter or a little bit longer depending on the needs and the functioning of the individuals that you're working with. But I'm going to argue that group therapy can actually be a treatment of choice. There are things that you get from group therapy that you wouldn't get on an individual basis. When you're in a group, oftentimes you're dealing with other individuals who are struggling just like you. So you could very easily say to the group facilitator, the group therapist, well, you don't know what I'm going through. It's kind of hard to say that in a group where your peers are going through some of the very same things you're going through. Granted, their reaction to their experiences might be different than you, but you have additional sounding boards. You also can use group experiences as practice for how to behave in the real world. Because you're dealing with like-minded individuals, it's an opportunity to treat it as a natural laboratory. You try things out. If it works, then you bring it into the world at large. If it doesn't, the stakes are relatively low because you're in a supportive community. So the group also will have group dynamics, and we're going to talk about group dynamics as we go through each of the lessons, but it's important to understand that whatever problems you're facing in your life are likely going to manifest in the group process as well. So they're going to be played out in the group. So if you have a need to save, then you're going to try and serve as the assistant group leader, or to minimize the experience other people might have. That might manifest itself in the group. So what is group therapy? So a group therapy is when two or more individuals who are experiencing similar struggles interact with one another and a clinician to work through their issues. There are different kinds of groups. There are task groups. So a task group is when a group of people come together to perform a task that has a concrete goal. So when we talk about community leaders and community planning, that would be a task group. A guidance group or psychoeducational group, here we're treating our participants in a way that educates them. For example, if you have individuals that have severe mental illness, you might use a psychoeducation group to talk about the symptoms of their condition. You might use a psychoeducation group to talk about strategies to deal with them. But what's interesting is that in a psychoeducation group, the group leader spends more time talking than in other types of groups because they're giving you exercise and training to guide you. So it's very structured. We also see this as people are preparing to enter high school. You might have a guidance or psychoeducational group to help people navigate their new world. Counseling or interpersonal groups, these help people resolve problems of living. A common example is a divorce group. So when people are going through divorce, they cope very differently than one another. But if you're struggling coping with divorce, you might benefit from hearing how other people are doing it, and you might benefit from the emotional support of your peers to reduce a sense of loneliness or alienation. We have psychotherapy groups. Now, psychotherapy groups are for more deep-seated psychological problems. So it's not the interpersonal issues like a divorce group, but these are more serious psychopathology that you're working with. We also have support groups. So that helps you deal with very specific issues, comfort, loss. So grief and loss groups are a form of a support group. And then we have self-help groups. So self-help groups is not the same thing as group therapy. So group therapy requires, as I defined earlier, 2 or more individuals.
The White State Raiders are back in action in the Nutter Center, Saturday, March 2nd at 7 p.m. as the Raiders battle.
Whereas in a self-help group, the leaders are not required to be licensed professionals. So if you're chairing a meeting at Alcoholics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, your credentials are your sobriety and your experience navigating it, not necessarily your schooling and practical experience. So why do we conduct group therapy? Well, according to Irvin Yalom, and Yalom is one of the leading voices in group therapy has many powerful functions. It has the ability to provide hope, universality, the ability to recognize that we're all experiencing very similar things. And I'm not trying to create a false equivalency because each person's suffering is unique, but some of the trends are universal. Groups can impart information, can be used to teach. It can be used to provide a sense of belonging or soothing with a catharsis. It could be used for support. It could be used for feedback, both from you and another person within the group. It could be used to teach you healthy confrontation. And it's very important that there's a saying one of my supervisors, Dr. Graham, said, with conflict comes intimacy. What does that mean? If you're willing to approach a person and provide constructive criticism, it will create a sense of conflict in the short term. But assuming you do it with love, it will develop a sense of intimacy or a closeness with that individual. So group therapy can help with existential factors like taking responsibility for one's life. Group therapy can be used for modeling. So both the leader and the other members of the group can model the desirable behavior, and you can learn through observation of others. Group serve as a microcosm, a small scale of the real world. As I said, it could be your natural laboratory, but you learn how to interact with people and execute your roles properly. It can be used to simulate your primary family or your family of origin. It can give you a sense of altruism, allow you to correct some emotional disturbance or develop a social skill. Now, social skills groups are very common in the school system. especially when we're dealing with middle school to high school, because there is a unique challenge that occurs in middle school to high school, which is trying to figure out one sense of self, one sense of identity. So teaching social skills can be useful, especially for people who feel overwhelmed by the largeness or magnitude of the experience. So there are some advantages to groups. As I said, groups provide a social atmosphere that's very similar to the real world, gives you an opportunity for social learning and interpersonal skills. And it's useful, as I said, in the school system and adolescence. Now, one thing that's interesting is because if you have a group of 8 to 12 people, the group leader is not going to charge you the same amount as an individual session. So groups can be cost effective. So my going rate for therapy is $175 for an individual session. My going rate for group therapy is $50. So you can see that group therapy can be cost effective for an individual who's on a budget. And then it gives you a sense of commonality where you don't feel like you're the only one struggling with a particular problem. And I'm going to go back to teens. Teenagers oftentimes feel like nobody gets them. Feels like they're struggling in the world all by themselves. So putting people in groups helps people feel like they're not the only one going through this particular problem. So group experiences also allow you to become aware of how you view yourself and how other people view you. And sometimes what's remarkable about group experiences is that you discover that how you see yourself is not consistent with how other people see you. And then you have to struggle with this inconsistency to figure out, well, who's right? And if they're right, what do I do to change? So that's great. Group dynamics can replicate your family of origin, as we talked about. So it can help you work out old family issues. A group member can make public statements regarding change that allows you to follow them. You can get feedback. You could support or challenge one another, which is great. And it gives you a multitude of perspectives. The disadvantages now. Here's the thing. Not every person is suitable for group therapy. So it's gonna be important for you to determine what the goal of your group is. And when you determine what the goal of your group is, then you need to have inclusion and exclusion criteria. So if the person doesn't meet the criteria you're looking for the specific population you're targeting, you might exclude that individual, right? And you have to think about, well, what are you going to do with the individuals that you exclude from group therapy? Are you going to refer them out? Are you going to treat them on an individual basis? And there is a sense of judgment or sensitivity one must have. So let's talk about the concept of a support group for individuals who experience domestic violence. You would not put perpetrators of domestic violence in the same group as victims of domestic violence, because the mere presence of the perpetrator sometimes can trigger the victim, or vice versa. So, or I should say. Some people might say, oh, well, it's a way of developing empathy for one another. But I personally wouldn't do that. If an individual has a personality disorder, that they're so dysregulated that they're not very good with others, or they might lash out, or they might demonize other members of the group, you might not put them in a group. Another disadvantage, moving away from not everyone can be in a group, is that confidentiality is more difficult to maintain. Here's the deal. In individual therapy, whatever you say is protected because there are laws. HIPAA will protect you from that information going out. When you're in a group setting, there are no laws that prohibit another member of the group talking about what you said. Now, you will have contracts, you will collaboratively develop rules that the group is going to follow as a whole, but there's limited consequence if someone violates the rules. Right now, if someone violates the rules of one of my groups, I require them to bring it back to the group and talk about it with the group. And then the group decides how they want to handle it in a compassionate way. But other than the most extreme scenario where you kick that person out of the group, what else can you do to that person? So confidentiality is a little bit more difficult to maintain. It's also harder to build trust and safety when you're in a room with one another. It's natural to create a social comparison and start to observe the other person and mistrust the other person, or to think that to look at them in potentially negative ways and be suspicious of them. So they have to earn your trust, and the more people that need to earn your trust, it's going to take longer for you to feel safe. And what we will see is that in early stages of group therapy, individuals are oftentimes very superficial in what they talk about.
That's the forming stage too. So I wanted to stop there. I know we're right at 150. A few of you are leading next week, but keep it in mind, I will, with your suggestion, do a halfway point of the paper being due. So it's March 1st. We'll maybe go for outline or half the paper April 1st, and then the full final paper due May 1st. That way you guys will have a chance to break it up. So I will then see you all Monday. So have a good weekend.